The sun was a merciless tyrant, a brazen eye burning a hole in the sky above the desolate plains of the Arizona Territory. The year was 1870, and for Elias Vance, a man built from the dust of the American West, every day was a fight against its silent fury. His face, etched with the scars of a war that had ended 5 years prior, was a map of a life lived on the fringes. He was a man running, not from the law, but from the ghosts that haunted his memory. A past he had tried to bury with every mile his weary horse, a bay mare named Mercy, carried him west. Elias was a cowboy by trade and a soldier by circumstance, a title that felt like a brand burned into his soul. His last job, a cattle drive gone wrong near the New Mexico border, had left him with an empty purse and a bounty on his head, thanks to a misunderstanding with a trigger-happy saloon owner. Now, with 2 relentless bounty hunters hot on his trail, he was pushing Mercy to her limits, seeking a hideout in the labyrinthine canyons of the Dragoon Mountains. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and despair. Elias's canteen was nearly empty, the last drops of water a cruel joke against the thirst that clawed at his throat. He squinted at the horizon, a shimmering line of heat and rock. The silence of the desert was deceptive. It was a hungry quiet, broken only by the rhythmic thud of Mercy's hooves and the low groan of his own fatigue. He had been riding for 2 days straight, the sun a constant weight on his shoulders, the thought of the bounty hunters a cold knot in his stomach. Just as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Elias spotted something. At first he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the light in his exhausted state. But as he drew closer, the image became terrifyingly real. It was a woman, her back propped against a jagged rock formation. Her skin was a deep bronze, and her features, even in this weakened state, were strong and resolute. She was Apache, and she was shackled. Heavy iron chains, thick and rusted, bound her wrists and ankles, and another chain was wrapped around her waist, securing her to the rock. A sense of dread, cold and sharp, pierced through Elias. This was a trap. It had to be. No one survived for long in this desolate place without a purpose. The bounty hunters could be watching from the rocks, waiting for him to play the Good Samaritan. The logical part of his mind screamed at him to turn back, to keep riding, to save himself. But as he looked at her, truly looked at her, he saw not a trap, but a soul in agony. Her clothes were torn, her lips cracked and dry, and her eyes, though clouded with pain, held a fierce, unyielding spirit. She was dying. Elias dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate. He unholstered his Colt single-action army revolver, the familiar weight a comfort in his hand. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, his voice a low rasp. I gotta know what happened." The woman's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Her silence was a defiance more powerful than any words. Elias took a step closer, his gaze scanning the surrounding rocks for any sign of movement. The air was still, heavy with the weight of the moment. He lowered his gun, a decision born not of naivete, but of a deeper, more profound empathy. He had seen enough suffering in his life to recognize it in another. He knelt beside her, the sand a hot cushion beneath his knees. He pulled his nearly empty canteen from his saddlebag and unscrewed the cap. He held it out, a silent offering. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on his. It was a moment of profound trust, a fragile bridge between 2 strangers in a world that demanded suspicion. Finally, with a weary sigh, she reached out and took the canteen. She drank slowly, her throat bobbing as she swallowed the precious liquid. After she had finished, she handed the canteen back to him. Her gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment, a spark of understanding passed between them. She pointed a shaky finger towards her ankles, the chains biting into her skin. Elias nodded. He took a pickaxe from his saddlebag, a tool he used more for prying rocks than for liberation. With a grunt, he began to work on the chains. The metal was old and stubborn, but with each strike a piece of the rusted link chipped away. The sound of the axe against the iron was a dissonant clang, a stark contrast to the quiet of the desert. He felt a deep satisfaction as the first chain broke, followed by the second. He then worked on the chain around her waist, and finally the ones on her wrists. When the last chain fell to the sand, with a dull thud, A profound sense of relief washed over him. The woman, now free, tried to stand but stumbled, her legs weak from disuse. Elias caught her, his hand on her arm, his touch respectful, yet firm. He helped her to her feet, supporting her as she took her first shaky steps in what must have been days. As the sun disappeared completely, leaving a trail of stars in its wake, the temperature plummeted. The desert, a furnace by day, was now a freezing tomb. Elias knew they couldn't stay here. He helped the woman onto Mercy's back, a slow and painstaking process. As he guided the horse, he stole a glance at her. Even in the dim light, he could see the strength in her. He had freed her from her physical chains, but her spirit, he knew, had never been shackled. He wondered what her story was, what had brought her to this unforgiving place. The desert held many secrets, and he had just stumbled upon one of its most compelling. As the moon rose, casting a silver glow over the desolate landscape, Elias and the Apache woman rode into the night, two souls bound by an act of unexpected kindness, leaving behind the dust and the ghosts of their past. The desert night was a cold, unforgiving beast. Elias huddled by a small fire, the flames a fragile shield against the biting chill. He had found a shallow cave a few miles from where he had found the woman, a temporary sanctuary from the elements and from the pursuit he knew was still out there. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, sat on the other side of the fire, a silent sentinel wrapped in a worn blanket he had given her. The moon was a sliver of bone in the dark sky, casting long, eerie shadows that danced with the flickering flames. He had offered her what little food he had, a strip of dried jerky and a few crackers. She had accepted it with a quiet grace that spoke volumes. The language barrier was a chasm between them, a frustrating wall of silence. He had tried a few words in Spanish, but her face remained impassive. She was an enigma, a beautiful and powerful presence in the wilderness. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, were the only things that spoke, and they held a depth of pain he could only guess at. As Elias chewed on his own piece of jerky, he thought about the bounty hunters. They were relentless, like hungry vultures circling a dying animal. He knew they would follow his tracks, and he was leaving a clear trail. The rescue of the woman, while the right thing to do, had complicated his escape. He couldn't ride as fast with a second person on Mercy's back, and every hour he spent hiding was another hour they could be gaining on him. Suddenly the woman's head snapped up. Her eyes, wide and alert, scanned the darkness beyond the reach of the firelight. She held a finger to her lips, a silent command for him to be quiet. Elias, whose senses had been honed by years of living on high alert, felt it too, a change in the air, a stillness that was unnatural. The crickets had stopped their nightly serenade. The wind had died down and the desert seemed to hold its breath. It was the silence of a predator on the hunt. He drew his revolver, the click of the hammer a deafening sound in the profound quiet. He looked at the woman, her face a mask of fierce concentration. She pointed to a cluster of rocks about 20 yards away, a place where the shadows were the deepest. He couldn't see anything, but he trusted her intuition. She had survived in this land, and her instincts were sharp. He felt a shiver of fear and respect. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a hunter. He moved silently, a ghost in the night, his body low to the ground. The woman followed, her movements fluid and soundless. He felt a hand on his shoulder and she pointed to the sky. A storm was brewing, dark clouds obscuring the moonlight. The air grew heavy, and a sudden gust of wind, cold and damp, swept through the canyon. It was a sandstorm, a blessing and a curse. It would wipe out their tracks, but it would also blind them. As the first grains of sand hit his face, stinging like 1,000 tiny needles, Elias saw a glint of metal from the rocks. A rifle barrel. He raised his revolver, his heart hammering against his ribs. He couldn't see a face, just a silhouette, a shadow waiting to strike. He fired, the sound of the gunshot swallowed by the sudden roar of the wind. He heard a sharp cry, followed by a thud. He didn't wait to see if he had hit his target. He grabbed the woman's hand and pulled her deeper into the cave. Inside, the sand swirled in a chaotic dance, and the wind howled like a banshee. They were safe, for now. He was shaking, a mix of adrenaline and relief. He looked at the woman, her face streaked with sand, her eyes still sharp and alert. She held up her hand, a gesture he had seen before in the desert. He realized she was asking for something, for him to give her something. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his Bowie knife, a long, heavy blade that had been a faithful companion through the war. He handed it to her. She took it, her fingers wrapping around the hilt with a familiarity that surprised him. She then reached into a small pouch she had tied to her waist, a pouch he hadn't noticed before, and pulled out a handful of something dark. She knelt by the fire and with the knife began to grind the dark material into a powder. The smell was earthy and pungent, like crushed herbs and dried earth. She then carefully drew a symbol on his forehead with the powder, a circle with a jagged line running through it. Elias was bewildered. He had no idea what this meant. Was it a ritual? A form of gratitude? A protection spell? The woman's eyes held a deep sense of purpose as she finished her task. She then reached out and took his hand, her touch surprisingly gentle. She held his palm up and drew the same symbol, the circle with the line, and then a series of smaller marks that looked like the feathers of an eagle. He felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a feeling of being seen, of being recognized. He looked at her, his eyes filled with questions. She simply looked back, her expression one of quiet certainty. The wind outside roared, and the sandstorm raged on, a chaotic symphony of nature's fury. They were two strangers, one a cowboy running from his past, the other an Apache woman with a mysterious mission. They were now bound by an unseen thread, an act of silent trust and a shared moment of survival. Elias had freed her from her physical chains, and now she had given him something in return, a moment of peace in the heart of a storm, a connection that transcended words, a sign of her trust. And it had left him profoundly shaken, not by fear, but by the weight of a quiet gratitude he had not felt in years. He realized then that their journey was only just beginning. The sandstorm raged for most of the night, a fierce, cleansing wind that scoured the land and erased their tracks. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the sky in a soft, ethereal light, the desert was reborn. The air was crisp and cool, the sand a pristine sheet of gold, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Elias and the Apache woman emerged from the cave, their clothes gritty with sand, their bodies tired but alive. He looked back at the cluster of rocks where he had fired his shot. There was no sign of a body, no blood, nothing to suggest that a man had been there. The wind had erased all evidence. He wondered if he had imagined it, if the stress of the chase had finally gotten to him. But then he saw it, a small dark stain on a rock, a telltale mark of an injury. He hadn't just fired into the darkness, he had hit his target. The bounty hunter had been injured, but he had survived, or at least had been able to drag himself away. The knowledge sent a chill down his spine. They were still out there. The woman pointed west, her movements decisive and confident. Elias didn't question her. He trusted her instincts more than his own. They were now a team, a silent partnership forged in the crucible of the desert. They moved with a synchronized rhythm, he leading the horse, she walking beside him, her steps light and sure. She was a silent guide, a compass in a world without landmarks. As they walked, Elias noticed something about her. She moved with a practiced grace, her body a testament to a life lived in harmony with the land. He saw the scars on her arms, thin white lines that told a story of a difficult past. He had his own scars, the jagged marks of a war that had left him hollow. They were a shared language, a testament to the pain they had both endured. He tried to talk to her again, to bridge the gap between them. "My name is Elias Vance," he said, his voice soft, a gentle murmur against the vast quiet of the desert. She looked at him, her eyes unreadable. He pointed to himself, repeating his name. Elias. She nodded slowly, her lips forming the shape of his name. As. The sound was hesitant, almost a whisper, but it was a breakthrough. He smiled, a genuine, tired smile that reached his eyes for the first time in a long time. She pointed to herself, and with her hand she made a gesture, a circle with a zigzag line running through it, the same symbol she had drawn on his forehead and hand. "O'ch'ú," she said, her voice a low, melodic sound. "It means..." She struggled for the word, and then she gestured with her hand, an image of a mountain and a storm. Thunder Woman. Elias was captivated. Thunder Woman. It was a beautiful name, one that fit her perfectly. He had found a name for the silent force of nature that had saved him from the bounty hunter, the woman who had shared her trust and her strength. As they continued their journey, a different kind of challenge arose. They were running low on water. Elias's canteen was nearly empty, and the sun was once again climbing to its zenith, its heat a palpable presence. O'ch'ú seemed to sense his worry. She stopped and knelt by a patch of dry, cracked earth. She pulled out the bowie knife he had given her and began to dig. Elias watched, curious, as she worked with a focused intensity. She dug for several minutes, the dirt flying in a rhythmic spray. He saw nothing but a dry hole, but she kept going, her movements deliberate and unwavering. Finally, she stopped. She reached into the hole and pulled out a small, gnarled root. She held it up, and a small, hopeful smile touched her lips. She began to scrape the root with the knife, and as she did, a clear, watery substance began to ooze out. It was a water-bearing root, a secret of the desert, a survival trick he had never known. She collected the liquid in a small cup, a gesture of resourcefulness and knowledge he found deeply impressive. She handed the cup to him first. It was a small amount, but it was enough to quench the most immediate thirst. He drank it, the taste earthy and a little bitter, but it was the most refreshing thing he had ever tasted. He then watched as she drank the rest, her face a picture of serene contentment. He had lived in the West for years, but he had never known these secrets. He was a survivor, but she was a part of the land itself. As they walked, she pointed out different plants, different types of rock formations. She used a language of gestures and sounds, a nonverbal communication that he somehow understood. He learned to read her movements, her subtle shifts in expression, and the way her eyes held a silent conversation. He had freed her from her chains, but she was teaching him how to truly survive in this world, not just endure it. She was giving him a new set of eyes, a new understanding of the earth. As the day wore on, they stumbled upon a narrow canyon, a natural fortress of red rock and winding pathways. It was a perfect place to hide, a maze of shadows and echoes. O'ch'ú pointed to a narrow crevice, a place where the sun never reached, and he knew it was where they would rest. The bounty hunters were still out there, a phantom threat hanging over them. But for now, in this quiet, hidden place, Elias felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had found a silent partner, a guide in a land he thought he knew, and the knowledge she had given him was a gift more precious than any coin. He had freed an enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she was giving him a part of her world, a world he had only ever seen as a place to be conquered. This had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy discovering that the frontier he thought he knew was far more complex and filled with silent wisdom than he had ever imagined. The canyon was a silent and ancient cathedral, its red rock walls towering above them like a testament to time. The air was cool and still, a welcome relief from the relentless sun. They had found a small protected alcove, a place where they could rest without fear of being seen. For the first time in days, Elias felt he could truly let his guard down. He and O'ch'ú sat in companionable silence, the only sound the gentle rustle of the wind. He took the opportunity to truly observe her. O'ch'ú was tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders, and the kind of strength that came from a life of hard work and resilience. Her face, with its high cheekbones and strong jawline, was a canvas of emotion, even when she was silent. He wondered about her story, about the chains, the mercenaries, the stolen relic. He wanted to ask, to understand, but the language barrier remained a formidable obstacle. He pointed to his chest. Elias. Then he pointed to her and she responded with O'ch'ú. He gestured to the sky, and with a series of quick, expressive hand motions, he told her about his life. He was a soldier, a blue coat. He gestured with his hands, indicating a rifle and a uniform. He showed her the scars on his arm, the jagged lines that spoke of a battle long past. He made a gesture of running, of being hunted, and then of finding her. He spoke with his hands, his face, his body, pouring out his story in a silent plea for understanding. She listened, her dark eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of understanding. She then began to tell her own story, not with words but with a similar language of gestures. She pointed to a cluster of rocks and then drew a circle in the sand, indicating a community, a tribe. She then pointed to herself, and then to a small leather pouch she wore around her neck. She opened it and revealed a small polished stone, smooth and black, with a simple design carved into it. "Wampum," she whispered, her voice a low murmur. He had heard the term before, a sacred item, a record of history, a symbol of a people's past. She then gestured to a group of men with guns and cold, calculating eyes. Mercenaries. She made a motion of them attacking, of them taking the wampum. Her face hardened with a deep, silent rage. She gestured to herself, indicating she had fought back, that she had protected her people. She then gestured to the chains, to her capture, and to the mercenaries leaving her to die. Her story was one of bravery, of sacrifice, and of a profound love for her people. Elias felt a deep surge of respect for her. She wasn't just a victim, she was a warrior. He had saved her from her physical chains, but her spirit had never been broken. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, for the preservation of her culture, for the memory of her people. He had only been fighting to save himself. The contrast was stark, and it made him feel small. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the canyon walls, Elias pulled out a small piece of paper and a pencil from his saddlebag. He had been a man of letters before the war, a schoolteacher in a quiet, forgotten town. He drew a stick figure of himself, Elias, and a stick figure of her, O'ch'ú. He then drew a stick figure of a horse, Mercy, and then a line, indicating their journey. It was a simple, childlike drawing, but it was a bridge. O'ch'ú looked at the drawing, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and a dawning understanding. She took the pencil from him and, with a careful, precise hand, drew a circle on her stick figure, the symbol of the Thunder Woman. She then drew a zigzag line indicating her path, and then she drew a picture of a mountain and a river, a place he hadn't seen yet. He knew she was telling him where they were going, the destination of their journey. The drawing was more than just a map. It was a promise. It was a sign of her trust, of her willingness to share her mission with him. He had rescued her, and now he was a part of her fight. He realized that the bounty on his head, the bounty hunters, the ghosts of his past, they all seemed to fade into insignificance. This was something real, something tangible, a purpose that was not about running, but about fighting for something that mattered. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun. She was a silent, powerful force, a woman of few words, but of profound actions. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, a simple act of human kindness, and in return, she had given him a purpose. She had given him a reason to stop running. It was a gift he hadn't known he needed, and it had left him profoundly shaken, a man who had thought his story was over, only to find it was just beginning. The journey continued, a slow, methodical march through the unforgiving landscape. O'ch'ú, with her innate knowledge of the land, was an invaluable guide. She could read the subtle shifts in the wind, the tracks of animals, and the hidden signs of water. They moved during the cooler hours of the day, resting in the shade of canyons and rock formations during the oppressive heat. Elias, a seasoned frontiersman, was learning things he never knew existed. He watched her as she identified plants that could be used for food and medicine, her hands moving with a practiced ease. She showed him how to build a small smokeless fire, a crucial skill for staying hidden. She was a living encyclopedia of the desert, a testament to a culture that had survived for centuries in a world that sought to erase it. Elias, with his formal education and military training, felt like a child learning to walk for the first time. One afternoon, as they were making their way through a dry gulch, O'ch'ú stopped abruptly, her body tensed, her eyes fixed on the ground. She pointed to a faint, almost invisible track in the sand. "He's watching," she mouthed, her voice a low, guttural whisper. Elias felt a jolt of adrenaline. He didn't know how she knew, but he trusted her implicitly. He drew his revolver, his senses on high alert. They waited, two silent statues in the suffocating heat. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the only sound the distant buzzing of flies. And then a sound, the unmistakable hiss of a rattlesnake. It was a sound that had always made Elias's blood run cold. But O'ch'ú didn't flinch. She pointed to a small rock formation, a place where a snake would naturally seek shelter. She then made a gesture with her hand, an image of a person hiding behind the rocks. It wasn't a snake they were hearing, it was a man who was mimicking the sound of a snake, a hunter's ruse. Elias's mind raced. It was a clever tactic, a way to lure them out into the open. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face a mask of fierce concentration. She pointed to the sky, and then made a gesture of a hawk circling, a symbol of observation and cunning. She was telling him that the hunter was patient, that he was waiting for them to make a mistake. Elias knew he couldn't fire blindly. He had to draw him out. He looked at O'ch'ú, and a silent plan formed between them. He made a motion of him walking away, and then a motion of her staying put. She understood immediately. She nodded, her eyes filled with a silent command for him to be careful. He began to walk, his steps slow and deliberate, a decoy. He made sure his movements were loud enough to be heard, creating a distraction. He walked towards a small cluster of cacti, pretending to look for something. He could feel the hunter's eyes on his back, a cold, predatory stare. He was a piece of bait, waiting for the trap to spring. The hunter, seeing his opportunity, made his move. He emerged from behind the rocks, a rifle in his hands, his face a grim mask of determination. He was one of the bounty hunters, a wiry man with a face like a dried apple, his eyes cold and devoid of empathy. "Vance!" he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Your run is over." But as he spoke, O'ch'ú acted. She had moved silently, like a ghost, her bare feet making no sound on the sand. She came up behind him, a small, polished stone from her pouch in her hand. She threw it with a swift, practiced motion. It struck the bounty hunter's hand, a sharp, precise blow. The man cried out in pain, his rifle clattering to the ground. Elias didn't hesitate. He spun around, his revolver raised, and in a single, fluid motion, he disarmed the man, knocking the gun from his hand. He looked at the bounty hunter, his face a mixture of surprise and frustration. "You're not as clever as you think you are," Elias said, his voice hard. "And you're not a snake. You're just a man." The bounty hunter, defeated and disarmed, looked from Elias to O'ch'ú, a look of pure, unadulterated fear in his eyes. He had underestimated them both. He had seen a lone cowboy and a chained woman, two easy targets. He had not seen a man fighting for his redemption, and a woman fighting for her people. Elias let the bounty hunter go, a decision that went against every instinct of the West. He was not a killer, not anymore. He was a man trying to outrun his past, not add to its body count. The man, shaken and humbled, scrambled away, a defeated figure in the vastness of the desert. Elias looked at O'ch'ú, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, a gesture of understanding. She had not asked him to kill, but to defend. She had shown him that there was another way, a way of outsmarting the enemy rather than simply overpowering them. She had given him the gift of a silent battle, a fight of wits and cunning rather than brute force. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she had taught him a new kind of strength, a strength of quiet wisdom and silent action. It had left him shaken, a cowboy learning that the wilderness was not just a place of survival, but a place of profound and humbling lessons. The bounty hunter's defeat, while a temporary victory, brought a new sense of urgency to their journey. They were now a known entity, a pair to be reckoned with. The other bounty hunter would be on high alert, his methods more cautious, and his pursuit even more relentless. O'ch'ú, with a renewed sense of purpose, guided them towards a new destination, a place of sanctuary, and, she hoped, answers. The landscape began to change, the harsh, dry plains giving way to a gentler terrain. They followed a dry riverbed, its cracked earth a testament to a time long past. But O'ch'ú pointed to a change in the vegetation, a slight increase in the greenery, and she insisted they continue. After several miles, they heard a sound, a low, melodic murmur that grew louder with every step. It was the sound of a river, a life-giving force in the heart of the desert. As they rounded a bend, they saw it. A narrow, winding river, its water a clear, crystalline blue. It was a sight that took Elias's breath away. He had been a man of the mountains, of the forests, but he had never seen a sight so beautiful, so miraculous in the midst of so much desolation. O'ch'ú pointed to the water, a rare smile gracing her lips. "Nabida," she said, her voice soft and reverent. "The giver of life." They knelt by the riverbank, their bodies grateful for the cool embrace of the water. Elias cupped his hands and drank, the taste pure and refreshing. He looked at O'ch'ú, who was washing the dust from her face, her movements slow and deliberate. He saw a moment of quiet peace, a reflection of her people's reverence for the land. As they rested, O'ch'ú found a smooth, flat stone on the riverbank. She took a small piece of charcoal from her pouch and began to draw, her fingers moving with a focused intensity. She drew a picture of a village, a cluster of teepees nestled by a river. She drew men and women, children playing, and a fire in the center, a symbol of community and life. She then drew a picture of the wampum, the polished stone, and then she drew a picture of a man, his face obscured by a hat, a symbol of a man with no identity. She then drew a picture of a circle, the symbol of her people, and then she drew a jagged line, a line that broke the circle. It was a story, told in images, a story of her people's history and of the tragedy that had befallen them. Elias watched, his heart heavy with the weight of her narrative. He knew this story. He had seen it play out time and again in the West, the story of a people displaced, a culture under attack. But to see it through her eyes, to see the pain and the resilience in her every line, was a new and profound experience. He was no longer just a spectator. He was a participant in her story. She then drew a picture of herself, a lone figure, and then a picture of him, a man on a horse. She drew a line connecting them, a line of hope. She then drew a picture of a mountain he had seen on his map, a place he knew to be the stronghold of a powerful tribe. She was telling him that this was their destination, the place where she would return the wampum and where her people would find sanctuary. He realized then that her mission was not just about a stolen object. It was about the preservation of her people's memory, the continuation of their story. The wampum was not just a stone. It was a testament to their existence, a symbol of their resilience. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, but she was giving him something far more valuable in return, a purpose that was not about running, but about fighting for a history that deserved to be remembered. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought he was a part of a new blank slate, only to realize he was a part of a story that was ancient and filled with a pain he was only beginning to understand. They left the river of life behind and began their ascent into the mountains. The air grew thinner, the terrain more rugged, but O'ch'ú moved with a determined stride, her body a testament to the strength of her will. The mountains were a different world, a place of soaring peaks, deep valleys, and silent ancient forests. It was a world that felt both familiar and new to Elias, a world that held its own secrets. They were now in the heart of Apache territory, a land he had always been told to avoid. The stories of Apache warriors were legendary, and the fear they instilled in the settlers was palpable. But with O'ch'ú by his side, he felt a sense of safety, a profound trust that transcended the prejudice of his own culture. He had a guide, a silent guardian who knew the whispers of the wind and the secrets of the stones. As they climbed higher, O'ch'ú pointed to a series of symbols carved into a rock face. They were ancient, weathered by time, but their meaning was clear. They were a warning, a sign to stay away. She then pointed to another symbol, a different one, a sign that she was of this place, that she belonged. Elias realized that the land was not just a place to be conquered. It was a living, breathing entity with its own language and its own rules. They rested near a small waterfall, its water a cool mist against their tired faces. O'ch'ú sat by the water's edge, her eyes closed in meditation. He watched her, captivated by her stillness, by the profound sense of peace she carried with her. He had never met anyone like her, a person so deeply connected to the earth, a person who found strength in silence and wisdom in the natural world. He took out his drawing, the simple stick figures on the paper. He drew a picture of the bounty hunter, the one who had been defeated. He drew a line through him, a symbol of their victory. He then drew a picture of the second bounty hunter, a man he hadn't yet seen, but a man he knew was coming. He drew a question mark next to him, a symbol of the unknown. O'Ch'ú opened her eyes and looked at the drawing. She took the pencil from him and, with a confident hand, drew a circle with the zigzag line, the symbol of the Thunder Woman, and then a line going through the second bounty hunter. It was a simple gesture, but its meaning was clear. She would not be defeated. She would stand with him, and they would face whatever came their way. She then drew a picture of a mountain, a large prominent peak with a sun symbol at the top. She then pointed to the wampum, the small polished stone. "Home," she said, her voice a low murmur. "This is where we go." Elias understood. The wampum was a part of her people's history, and it had to be returned to its sacred place, to the heart of their home. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in a breathtaking palette of red and purple, they prepared for the night. Elias built a fire, and O'Ch'ú, with her knowledge of the medicinal plants, brewed a bitter tea that soothed his tired muscles. They sat in silence, two souls from two different worlds, bound by a shared purpose and a mutual respect. He looked at O'Ch'ú, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, a simple act of human kindness, and in return, she had given him a new perspective on the world. She had shown him that the West was not just a place of conflict and conquest, but a place of profound beauty, of ancient wisdom, and of a silent strength that transcended any language. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought he knew everything about the frontier, only to find that he was just beginning to learn its deepest and most powerful lessons. The air in the mountains was thin and crisp, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the plains. Elias and O'Ch'ú pressed on, their journey a silent, determined march towards the Mountain of Whispers. They moved with a shared rhythm, a silent understanding that had deepened with every passing day. Elias had become accustomed to her non-verbal communication, her subtle gestures and expressions that spoke volumes. As they approached a narrow pass, O'Ch'ú stopped abruptly, her body tensing. She pointed to a faint track in the dirt, a set of footprints that were too fresh to be old. "He's here," she said, her voice a low whisper. "The other one." Elias's heart sank. He had hoped they had a head start, that the vastness of the mountains would have swallowed their pursuer, but the ghost of vengeance was a relentless hunter, and he was close. He drew his revolver, the familiar weight a cold comfort in his hand. He looked at O'Ch'ú, his eyes filled with a silent question. She nodded, her expression grim. She pointed to a set of high rocks, a perfect place for an ambush. She then made a gesture, a plan forming between them. She would create a diversion and he would take the hunter by surprise. Elias was a soldier, a man who had seen his share of battles, but he had never fought with a partner who was so perfectly in sync with him. They were two halves of a whole, a silent team of survival. He moved to the other side of the pass, his body low to the ground, his senses on high alert. He could hear the faint sound of a rifle being cocked, a chilling sound that sent a shiver down his spine. The hunter was a professional, a man who knew his trade. Suddenly, a sound. A rock, dislodged by O'Ch'ú's foot, clattered down the mountainside, a jarring sound in the profound silence. The hunter's attention was diverted, his rifle trained on the sound. It was the moment Elias had been waiting for. He emerged from his hiding place, his revolver raised, his voice a low growl. "Drop your weapon," he commanded. The hunter, a large man with a thick beard and eyes as cold as a winter storm, froze. He was a man of brute force and violence, a stark contrast to the cunning of his partner. He looked at Elias, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had not expected him to be so close. "You're a fool, Vance," the hunter sneered, his voice a low, gravelly sound. "You can't outrun me." "Maybe not," Elias replied, his voice calm and steady. "But I can sure as hell outsmart you." As he spoke, O'Ch'ú, a silent ghost, emerged from behind the rocks. She held a sling in her hand, a simple but effective weapon. With a swift, practiced motion, she sent a small, sharp rock flying. It struck the hunter's hand, and he cried out in pain, his rifle clattering to the ground. Elias didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, disarming the man with a swift kick to his weapon. The hunter, defeated and disarmed, looked at O'ch'ú with a look of pure, unadulterated fear. He had seen her as an easy target, a woman to be exploited, but he had underestimated her. She was a warrior, a force of nature, a woman who would not be broken. Elias looked at the man, his face a mask of grim determination. He wasn't going to kill him. He was going to show him a different kind of justice, a justice that was not born of violence but of strength and resilience. He tied the man's hands with a rope, a simple act that spoke of his newfound resolve. He would leave him for the authorities, a message to the bounty hunters that he was not a man to be trifled with. He looked at O'ch'ú, a silent partner in his fight. She nodded, a gesture of approval. They had faced a formidable enemy, and they had won, not with brute force but with a silent understanding and a shared purpose. As they continued their journey, they left the hunter behind, a defeated figure in the vastness of the mountains. Elias looked at O'ch'ú, a deep sense of gratitude in his heart. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, a simple act of human kindness, and in return she had given him a partner, a guide, and a new kind of strength. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought he was a lone wolf only to find that he was a part of a pack, a family of two, fighting for a future that was not about running, but about walking with a newfound purpose and a quiet dignity. With the bounty hunters now a distant, defeated memory, a new sense of hope filled the air. The oppressive weight of being hunted had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, Elias felt he could breathe freely. The mountains, once a source of dread, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where he and O'ch'ú were no longer running, but were moving towards something. They had reached a plateau, a high, flat expanse of land that overlooked a breathtaking vista. The sun, a golden orb in the vast blue sky, was beginning its slow descent, painting the world in shades of orange and pink. O'ch'ú pointed to a distant peak, a mountain that stood out from all the others, its peak crowned with a faint, almost magical glow. "Apache's heart," she said, her voice a low, reverent whisper. Elias knew it was their destination, the place where the wampum would be returned, the place where her people's story would continue. They made camp, a small protected space nestled between two large rocks. Elias built a fire, and O'ch'ú, with her knowledge of the land, found a small stream and caught a fish with her bare hands, a feat that left him in awe. They sat by the fire, the fish cooking on a spit, the air filled with a sense of peace and a quiet anticipation. As they ate, Elias took out his drawing, the simple stick figures on the paper. He drew a picture of the two bounty hunters, and then he drew a line through them, a symbol of their final defeat. He then drew a picture of the mountain, the one they were heading towards, and he drew a sun rising over its peak. It was a picture of a new beginning, a new dawn. O'ch'ú looked at the drawing, a genuine smile on her face. She took the pencil from him, and with a careful hand drew a circle on her stick figure, the symbol of the Thunder Woman, and then she drew a line connecting her to the mountain. She then drew a line connecting Elias to her, a symbol of their bond, their shared journey. She then pointed to her chest and then to his, and she made a gesture of two people standing side by side, looking at the same horizon. It was a powerful non-verbal statement of their partnership, their friendship, and their shared future. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. He had found something he had not even known he was looking for, a connection, a purpose, a sense of belonging. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun. She was a silent, powerful force, a woman who had taught him more about life and survival than a lifetime of experience. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, a simple act of human kindness, and in return, she had given him a truth that was more precious than any treasure. She had taught him that true strength was not about a gun or a title, but about a quiet dignity, a profound respect for the world, and an unwavering belief in a better future. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was just beginning, a story written not in ink, but in the dust of the desert and the heart of the mountains. The journey was not yet over. but the promise of the sun of a new day was finally within reach. The journey up the mountain was a pilgrimage, not just a climb. Every step felt heavier, not with fatigue, but with the weight of the story they were carrying. The air grew thinner, and the world below them shrunk to a vast, dusty map. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the rocky soil and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Elias felt a deep sense of reverence, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a boy in church. This was a different kind of faith, a faith in the land and the ancient wisdom it held. O'ch'ú led the way with an unwavering certainty, her movements sure and confident. She pointed out symbols carved into rocks, ancient glyphs that told stories of her people's past. She pointed to a gnarled juniper tree, its branches twisted into the shape of a man, and she spoke of a spirit that resided within it, a guardian of the mountain. Elias didn't understand her words, but he understood the reverence in her voice, the deep respect she held for the natural world. As they ascended, the temperature plummeted. The sun, once a source of oppressive heat, was now a distant, cold light. The ground was covered in a thin layer of frost, and their breath plumed in the cold air. They found shelter in a small cave, a natural crevice in the mountain's face. Elias built a fire, its flames a warm, flickering beacon against the encroaching darkness. As they sat by the fire, O'ch'ú took out the wampum, the polished black stone she carried in her pouch. She held it in her hand, her eyes closed in a silent prayer. Elias watched her, a deep sense of respect in his heart. He had freed her from her chains, but she had always been free, her spirit unyielding, her connection to her people unbreakable. He took out his drawing, the simple stick figures on the paper. He drew a picture of the mountain, and then he drew a picture of a ceremony, a group of people gathered around a fire, a man holding a stone, the wampum. He was drawing the future, the moment when she would return home, the moment when their journey would end. O'ch'ú opened her eyes and looked at the drawing. A single tear, a silent testament to her emotions, rolled down her cheek. She pointed to the drawing, and then to her heart, and then to his. "You," she said, her voice a low, melodic sound. "You are brother." Elias felt a surge of emotion, a feeling of profound connection he hadn't felt in years. He had lost his family in the war, his brother, his parents, all gone. He had been a man alone, a man running from his past. But now he had found something he had not even known he was looking for, a family, a sister, a profound and unbreakable bond. He took her hand, his touch gentle and respectful. "O'ch'ú," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Brother." She squeezed his hand, a silent promise. They were two people from different worlds, two souls from different cultures, but they were now family, bound by an act of unexpected kindness and a shared journey. The night was cold and silent, but the warmth of the fire and the warmth of their connection was enough. Elias knew that the journey was not over, that there were still challenges to face, but he was no longer alone. He had a partner, a guide, a sister. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return she had given him a family. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought he was a lone wolf, only to find that he was a part of something bigger, something more powerful, something more meaningful than he had ever imagined. The promise of the sun, of a new day, was no longer just a hope. It was a reality, a promise of a future they would face together. The ascent continued, but now it was a shared effort, a rhythmic dance of two people moving as one. Elias, though a man of the plains, found himself adapting to the unforgiving terrain of the mountains, his movements guided by O'ch'ú's silent expertise. She was a woman who moved with the land, her body a part of the wind and the rock. They passed through a narrow, winding canyon, its walls etched with the stories of the ages, a natural museum of a people's history. O'ch'ú pointed to a symbol carved into the rock, a running deer, and with a series of graceful hand motions, she spoke of the hunt, of the hunt that was successful, a testament to the bounty the land provided. Elias, who had always seen hunting as a necessity, now saw it as a sacred dance between man and nature. The canyon was a place of abundance, a place where life flourished in the most unlikely of places. As they emerged from the canyon, they saw it, a small hidden spring, its water bubbling from the earth, a clear, crystalline pool surrounded by lush greenery that seemed to defy the harsh, arid landscape. It was a miracle in the midst of so much rock and dust. O'ch'ú knelt by the water's edge, a look of profound reverence on her face. She took out her wampum, the polished black stone, and she dipped it into the water, a gesture of respect and gratitude. "Chide ili," she said, her voice a low, melodic sound that seemed to hum with the energy of the land. "The sacred place of our ancestors." Elias knelt beside her, his heart filled with a sense of awe. He had seen many beautiful sights in his life, but he had never seen anything so pure, so untouched, so sacred. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment. He had freed her from her physical chains, but he now understood that she had always been free, her spirit unyielding, her connection to her people unbreakable. As they rested by the spring, O'ch'ú began to tell him a story, not with words, but with a series of gestures and sounds that were as old as the mountains themselves. She drew a picture of a man and a woman in the dust, and she gestured to the sun and the moon, a story of creation, of a man and a woman who were born from the earth and the sky. She drew a picture of a mountain, a large prominent peak with a sun symbol at the top, and she pointed to it, a symbol of their home, their sanctuary, their sacred place. Elias listened, his heart filled with a sense of wonder. Her story was not just a myth, it was a truth that was etched into the very fabric of the land. He had been a man of books, a man of facts, but he was learning that there was a different kind of truth, a truth that was felt, not read. Suddenly, a sound. The distant sound of hooves, a faint rhythmic thud that grew louder with every passing minute, a jarring note in the profound silence of the sacred spring. Elias's body tensed, his years of military training kicking in. He looked at O'ch'ú, her eyes wide and alert. She pointed to a high rock, a perfect place for a lookout. Elias scrambled up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He squinted at the horizon, and then he saw them, a small band of riders, their faces obscured by the distance, their movements slow and deliberate, a silent, menacing presence. He looked at O'ch'ú, his face a mask of grim determination. He knew they couldn't run. They were too close to their destination. They had to face them. He drew his revolver, the familiar weight a cold comfort in his hand. He looked at O'ch'ú, and a silent plan formed between them. She would lead them into a trap, a place where they would be at a disadvantage, a place where Elias could use his skills as a marksman. They moved with a synchronized rhythm, a silent dance of survival. O'ch'ú led them into a narrow canyon, a natural labyrinth of rock and shadow. She moved with a silent grace, her body a part of the landscape. Elias followed, his senses on high alert, his hand on his revolver. The riders followed, their hooves echoing in the narrow canyon, a sound that announced their impending doom. They were walking into a trap they had no idea existed. Elias looked at O'ch'ú, a silent partner in his fight. She had a plan that was born not of a book, but of a deep, innate knowledge of the land. Suddenly, a sound. A rock, dislodged by O'ch'ú's foot, clattered down the mountainside, a jarring sound in the profound silence. The riders' attention was diverted, their rifles trained on the sound. It was the moment Elias had been waiting for. He emerged from his hiding place, his revolver raised, his voice a low growl. "Drop your weapons," he commanded. The riders, surprised and defeated, looked at Elias and then at O'ch'ú, a silent force of nature. They had underestimated them both. They had seen a lone cowboy and a chained woman, two easy targets. They had not seen a man fighting for his redemption and a woman fighting for her people. They were defeated, not by brute force, but by a silent wisdom and a profound knowledge of the land. Elias had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she had given him a new kind of strength, a strength of quiet cunning and silent wisdom. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought he knew everything about the frontier, only to find that he was just beginning to learn its deepest and most powerful lessons. The sacred spring, the giver of life, had given him more than just water. It had given him a new understanding of the world, The two riders, now disarmed and humbled, were not bounty hunters. They were a part of the Apache tribe, sent out to investigate the strange presence in their sacred mountains. Their faces, once grim and suspicious, were now filled with a dawning understanding. They looked at O'ch'ú, their eyes wide with recognition and relief. They spoke to her in their native tongue, a rapid, melodic stream of words that Elias couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. She was home. She was a symbol of hope, a living testament to a people's resilience, a sacred trust that had been returned to them. O'ch'ú gestured to Elias, and with a series of quick, expressive hand motions, she explained what had happened: the chains, the bounty hunters, his act of kindness, their journey, the ghost of a man named Silas who had been hunting them. The two men listened, their faces a mixture of surprise and gratitude. They looked at Elias with a newfound respect, a profound understanding that transcended the language barrier. He was not an enemy. He was a friend, a brother. He was a man who had chosen to do the right thing, a man who had defied his own culture to help a stranger, a man who had become a living testament to a different kind of world. They led them deeper into the mountains, to a hidden village, a small, protected community nestled in a high valley. It was a beautiful sight, a place of peace and tranquility, a place of family and community. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat, the sound of children's laughter, and the low murmur of conversation, a symphony of a life well lived. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. He had been a man alone for so long, a man running from his past, and now he was in a place of family, a place of belonging. The village was a testament to the resilience of the Apache people, a community that had survived against all odds. The homes were made of woven brush and earth, and the people, with their kind faces and their warm smiles, were a living testament to a culture that was vibrant and strong. They were led to the center of the village, to a large council fire, where the elders of the tribe were gathered. The elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of the ages, sat in a circle, their eyes a deep, knowing dark. They looked at Elias with a silent intensity, a gaze that seemed to pierce his very soul, a silent inquiry into the nature of the man who had come to them. O'ch'ú approached the fire, and with a quiet dignity she began to tell her story, her voice a low, melodic sound, her hands moving in a graceful dance of gestures and expressions. She spoke of her capture, of the stolen wampum, and of the man who had saved her, the man who had defied his own culture to help her. She then took out the wampum, the polished black stone, and she presented it to the elders, a symbol of her mission, of her success, of her return, a sacred trust that had been restored. The elders listened, their faces a mixture of solemnity and profound relief. When she had finished, they looked at Elias, their eyes filled with a deep sense of gratitude. One of the elders, an old man with a face like a dried apple and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 years, stood up. He walked towards Elias, his movements slow and deliberate, a profound presence. He stopped in front of him, and he took Elias's hand, and he looked at him, his eyes filled with a silent gratitude. "You," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound. "You are not a man. You are a friend, a brother. You have saved one of our own. You have saved us all." Elias was profoundly shaken. He had not expected this profound sense of gratitude, this acceptance. He had been a man running from his past, a man who had thought his life was a closed book, and now he was in a place of family, a place of belonging. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she had given him a family. It was a gift he had not even known he was looking for, a gift that was more precious than any gold, a gift that had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought he was a lone wolf, only to find that he was a part of a pack, a family of two, fighting for a future that was not about running but about walking with a newfound purpose and a quiet dignity. The night was filled with the sounds of celebration. The village, once quiet and still, was now alive with the rhythm of drums and the melody of flutes. The air was filled with the scent of roasting meat and the sweet smell of sagebrush, a feast for the senses. Elias, a man who had been a loner for so long, was now a part of a community. He sat by the council fire, surrounded by the elders and the warriors, his heart filled with a sense of peace he had not felt in years. He watched as the children, with their bright, happy faces, danced around the fire, their laughter a melody of pure joy. He watched as the women, with their kind eyes and their gentle smiles, prepared the feast. He watched as O'ch'ú, with her quiet dignity, sat by the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. She was home. She was a hero. And he, a simple cowboy, was a part of her story, a part of their collective victory. The elders, with their profound wisdom, spoke of the wampum, of its history, of its importance to their people. They spoke of the stolen years, the years of pain and suffering, and they spoke of the hope that had returned with the wampum's return. They looked at Elias, their eyes filled with gratitude, and they spoke of a prophecy of a man from a different world who would come to their aid, a man who would defy his own culture to help them. Elias was humbled. He had not seen himself as a hero, but as a man who had done the right thing. He had not expected this profound sense of acceptance, this sense of belonging. He had been a man running from his past, a man who had thought his life was a closed book, and now he was in a place of family, a place of belonging, a place of a shared future. As the night wore on, one of the warriors, a young man with a face like a hawk and eyes that held a fierce, unyielding spirit, approached Elias. He held out his hand, a gesture of friendship and respect that transcended the language barrier. "My name is Tsine," he said, his voice a low, melodic sound. "You are brother. You have honor." Elias took his hand, his touch firm and respectful. "Elias," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Thank you." The conversation was slow and deliberate, a mix of broken English and hand gestures, but the meaning was clear. Tsine spoke of the bounty hunters, of their relentless pursuit, of the man who had captured O'ch'ú. He spoke of a man named Silas, a man of great greed and immense cruelty, a man who had stolen the wampum not for its value, but for the power it held over the Apache people. He spoke of a man who was now seeking a final revenge, a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Elias's heart sank. The defeat of the bounty hunters was a temporary victory. The real enemy was still out there, a ghost of vengeance, a man who would stop at nothing to destroy everything they had fought for. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment. He had to protect her. He had to protect her people. His journey was not over. It was just beginning. The fire of unity burned bright in the center of the village, a symbol of a people's resilience, a symbol of a man's newfound purpose. Elias had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she had given him a cause to fight for, a family to protect, and a future to believe in. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought he was a lone wolf, only to find that he was a part of a pack, a family of two fighting for a future that was not about running, but about walking with a newfound purpose and a quiet dignity. The peace of the village was a fragile thing, a beautiful and delicate flower in a world of thorns. It was a serenity earned through resilience, a moment of calm that felt both precious and precarious. Elias, now a silent partner in the community, felt a new sense of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a deep and profound need to protect the people who had given him a home. The threat of Silas, the vengeful hunter, was a silent and constant weight, a shadow that hung over their newfound peace, a lingering storm on the horizon that he knew would one day break. This wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was a matter of honor, of protecting the family he had so unexpectedly found. He and Tsine, the young warrior, spent their days scouting the perimeter of the village, their senses on high alert, a silent watch over the fragile tranquility they had all worked so hard to create. One afternoon, as they were making their way through a dense, unforgiving forest, Tsine stopped abruptly, his body tensing like a coiled spring. He held up a hand, a silent command for Elias to halt. He pointed to a faint, almost invisible track in the soft earth, a telltale sign of a man on the move, a man who moved with a predatory silence. "He's here," Tsine said, his voice a low whisper that was barely audible over the rustle of the leaves. Silas. Elias felt a jolt of adrenaline, a cold shock that ran through his veins. He had a name for the ghost of vengeance, a face for the shadow that had been haunting them. The phantom from his past was no longer a phantom. It was a man who was now on their sacred ground. They followed the tracks, a silent, methodical hunt. Elias, with his years of experience as a soldier and a cowboy, and Cena, with his innate knowledge of the land, were a formidable team. They moved with a synchronized rhythm, their bodies low to the ground, their movements fluid and soundless, a two-man hunting party with a shared purpose. The tracks led them to a small hidden crevice, a place where a man could hide and watch, a perfect place for an ambush. Elias and Cena looked at each other, a silent plan forming between them. They would not be ambushed. They would be the hunters. They found him. Silas. He was a man of immense size, a hulking figure whose face was a mask of pure, unadulterated cruelty. He was perched on a high rock, his rifle trained on the village below, a predator waiting for his prey. His presence was a violation, a stain on the pristine beauty of the mountains. Elias and Cena looked at each other, their eyes filled with a silent command. They would not kill him, they would disarm him. They would show him a different kind of justice, a justice that was not born of violence but of strength and resilience. Cena, with his quiet cunning and profound knowledge of the land, crept up behind Silas, a small, sharp rock in his hand. Elias, with his military precision, raised his revolver, his voice a low growl that cut through the silence. "Drop your weapon, Silas," he commanded. Silas, surprised and defeated, looked at Elias and then at Cena, a silent force of nature. He had underestimated them both. He had seen a simple cowboy and a savage Indian, two easy targets. He had not seen a man fighting for his redemption and a man fighting for his people. He had not seen the unity that had been forged in the heart of the mountains. Silas, defeated and disarmed, was brought back to the village. The elders, with their profound wisdom, listened to his story, the story of a man consumed by greed and a desire for vengeance. They looked at Elias, their eyes filled with a deep sense of gratitude. He had not only saved one of their own, he had saved them all. He had faced the ghost of vengeance, and he had won not with brute force, but with a silent wisdom and a profound knowledge of the land. The fire of unity burned bright in the center of the village, a symbol of a people's resilience, a symbol of a man's newfound purpose. Elias had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return she had given him a cause to fight for, a family to protect, and a future to believe in. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. The air in the village, once thick with tension, was now filled with the sounds of a new beginning. The defeat of Silas, the ghost of vengeance, had brought a profound sense of peace to the community, a peace that was both tangible and spiritual. The elders, with their profound wisdom and a deep understanding of justice, had decided his fate. He would not be killed, for that was not their way. He would be banished, a man alone, a man without a purpose, a man who had been defeated not by brute force, but by a silent wisdom and a profound sense of unity. He was sent away with a stark warning, never to return. Elias, now a hero in the eyes of the Apache people, felt a sense of belonging he had not felt in years. He was no longer a man running from his past, but a man walking towards a new future. He and O'ch'ú, with their shared history and their unspoken bond, were two souls from two different worlds, but they were now family, bound by an act of unexpected kindness and a shared journey that had changed them both forever. Their relationship was a living testament to the possibility of peace and unity in a world of conflict and prejudice. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in a breathtaking palette of red and purple, O'ch'ú approached Elias, a small leather drum in her hands. She sat by the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames, and she began to play. The sound was a low, rhythmic beat, a sound that seemed to come from the heart of the earth itself. It was a sound of healing, a sound of remembrance, a sound of a people's resilience. The beat was a heartbeat, a pulse that connected the past, the present, and the future. She sang a song, a low melodic murmur, a song of her people's history, a song of their pain and their suffering, and a song of their hope and their resilience. She sang of the stolen years, the years of pain and suffering, and she sang of the wampum, the polished black stone, a symbol of their history, a symbol of their resilience. She sang of the man who had saved her, the man who had defied his own culture to help her, a man who had become a brother. She sang of Elias and the simple, quiet act of kindness that had changed everything. Elias listened, his heart filled with a deep sense of gratitude. He had not understood her words, but he had understood her song. He had understood the pain in her voice, the hope in her melody, the profound sense of connection in her every note. She was not just a woman. She was a storyteller, a keeper of her people's history, a living testament to a culture that was vibrant and strong. As she played, Elias felt the ghosts of his past begin to fade. The scars of the war, the pain of his losses, the burden of his past, they all seemed to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of peace and a newfound purpose. He had been a man alone, a man running from his past, and now he was a man walking towards a new future, a future filled with a sense of belonging and a profound sense of peace. The healing drum, with its low, rhythmic beat, had done its work. It had healed his heart, it had soothed his soul, and it had given him a new understanding of the world. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she had given him a gift that was more precious than any gold, a gift that had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into a new life. Elias, with the guidance of O'ch'ú and the elders, was no longer just a guest in the Apache village. He was a part of it. He learned to hunt with a bow and arrow, to track with the silent cunning of a predator, and to read the signs of the land. He was a man of books, a man of facts, but he was learning a different kind of knowledge, a knowledge that was felt in the heart, not read from a page. He learned to listen to the whisper of the wind, to feel the rhythm of the earth, to understand the profound interconnectedness of all living things. He spent his days with Tsina, the young warrior, who, with his patient guidance, taught him the ways of the Apache. He learned to build a fire without a match, to find water where there was none, and to use the plants of the desert for medicine and food. He was a man who had thought he knew everything about the frontier, only to find that he was just a student, a man who was just beginning to learn its deepest and most powerful lessons. He watched as the children of the village, with their bright, happy faces, learned the stories of their people, the stories that were etched into the very fabric of the land. He watched as the elders, with their profound wisdom, passed down their knowledge from one generation to the next. He was a man who had lost his own history, and now he was a part of a history that was ancient and filled with a pain and a resilience he was only beginning to understand. He and O'ch'ú, with their shared history and their unspoken bond, were two souls from two different worlds, but they were now family, bound by an act of unexpected kindness and a shared journey. She taught him her language, a low, melodic sound that was a part of the land itself. She taught him the names of the mountains, the rivers, the stars. She taught him the names of the spirits that resided within the rocks and the trees. He was a man who had been a loner for so long, a man who had lost his own family, and now he was a part of a family that was a part of the earth itself, a family that was defined not by blood, but by a shared spirit. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Elias took out his drawing, the simple stick figures on the paper, a relic from a life that felt a world away. He drew a picture of himself, Elias, and a picture of O'ch'ú, the Thunder Woman. He then drew a circle around them, a symbol of their unity, of their family. He then drew a picture of the mountain, the one they were on, and he drew a picture of a new sun, a new beginning. It was a picture of a new life, a new purpose, a new dawn, a future that he had not dared to dream of before. O'ch'ú looked at the drawing, a genuine smile on her face. She took the pencil from him, and with a careful hand, she drew a picture of her people, the Apache, and she drew a picture of his people, the white man. She then drew a bridge, a symbol of their connection, a symbol of the future, a future where two different worlds could come together in peace and in unity. Elias was profoundly shaken. He had not expected this profound sense of hope, this sense of a shared future. He had been a man running from his past, a man who had thought his life was a closed book, and now he was a part of a story that was just beginning, a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. Elias's life in the village settled into a routine of learning and contributing, a gentle rhythm that felt both foreign and profoundly right. He became a silent partner in the tribe's daily life, a man who had found his place not by force, but by a quiet and profound acceptance. The elders, with their profound wisdom and silent observation, had given him a new name, a name that was not spoken aloud, but was a feeling of acceptance, a feeling of belonging that settled deep in his bones. He was no longer just Elias, the cowboy from the outside world. He was a part of them, a thread woven into the intricate tapestry of their community. He learned to read the seasons in the rustle of the leaves, to understand the language of the wind as it swept through the canyons, and to find solace in the ancient, unyielding presence of the mountains. But the peace was a fragile thing, a delicate blossom in a hostile world. A new weight, a new kind of responsibility settled on Elias's shoulders. He knew that their story was not yet over. The world outside the mountains was still the same, a world of conflict and prejudice, a world that would not easily accept the unity he had found. The bounty on his head was still active, a ghost of his past, a grim reminder that he was a man on the run, a target that would one day draw a storm to their peaceful valley. He had seen the way the outside world worked, the relentless greed, the unwavering hatred, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it found its way to their hidden sanctuary. One afternoon, as he and Tsine, the young warrior, were scouting the perimeter of the village, they saw it. A plume of smoke, thin and distant, but with a shape that was all wrong. It was not the gentle curl of a friendly cooking fire, but a dark, sharp column that climbed with malevolent purpose into the sky. It was a signal of danger, a signal of a new threat. Elias's heart sank, a cold dread washing over him. He knew what it meant. The outside world had found them. The ghost of his past, the bounty on his head, had finally led the wolves to the flock. The tranquility of their existence was about to be shattered. They raced back to the village, their hearts pounding in their chests like the frantic beat of a war drum. The elders, with their profound wisdom and a deep connection to the land, were already gathered around the council fire, their faces grim and solemn. They had seen the smoke. They knew what it meant. There was no need for words. The unspoken understanding passed between them like a current, a shared certainty of what was to come. O'ch'ú, with her quiet dignity, approached Elias. Her face was a mask of determination, her eyes filled with a new sense of urgency, a fierce, protective fire. She pointed to a high, secluded pass, a natural choke point in the mountains, a place where they could make a stand, a place where they could defend their home, their way of life. Elias nodded, the last vestige of the running man gone. He was not a warrior by blood, but he was a protector by choice. He would not run. He would fight for them, for the people who had given him a new life, a new family, a new purpose. The battle was inevitable. The world outside the mountains, with its greed and its hatred, was coming for them. Elias and the warriors of the village, with their bows and arrows and their newfound resolve, were ready. They were outnumbered, but they were not defeated. They were a people with a history, a people with a future, a people who would not be broken. Elias looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment, her eyes filled with a profound sense of purpose. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, an act of simple human kindness, and in return she had given him a family, a cause to fight for, a future to believe in. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. The promise of the sun, of a new day, was no longer just a hope. It was a reality, a promise of a future they would face together, a future they would fight for. The morning of the final stand was a cold, silent affair, the kind of quiet that precedes a cataclysm. The sun, a pale orb in the sky, was a silent witness to the impending conflict, its light too weak to offer warmth or comfort. The air was thick with a profound sense of tension, a quiet before the storm that felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Elias and the warriors of the village stood at the high, secluded pass, their bodies ready for battle, their hearts filled with a fierce, unyielding resolve. They were a small band, but they were a united one, a force of nature against a tide of human greed. They were not soldiers in a formal army, but they were warriors in the truest sense of the word. They were fighting for their home, for their family, for their future. Elias, with his revolver in his hand, a cold comfort in the early morning chill, stood beside Sine, his friend, his brother. They were a silent partnership, a testament to the unity that had blossomed in the heart of the mountains. Their fight was not just his, but theirs. It was a fight for the right to exist, for the right to live in peace, for the right to a future free from the prejudice and hatred of the outside world. Then they saw them, the men from the outside world. A large, formidable group of men, their faces a mask of greed and hatred. They were bounty hunters, men who had come for blood, men who had come for a bounty that was not on a man, but on a people's future, a way of life they could not comprehend. They were led by a man named Silas, a man who had returned, a man who was consumed by a desire for vengeance, his face a grim caricature of unyielding cruelty. The sight of him, a ghost of a ghost, solidified Elias's resolve. This was not just a battle, it was a reckoning. The battle was a chaotic symphony of violence and courage, a brutal dance of life and death. The sound of gunshots echoed through the pass, a jarring note against the ancient silence of the mountains. The cry of a hawk, a low, guttural growl of a man in pain. They were all a part of a fight that was not just a fight for survival, but a fight for a way of life that was defined by respect for the land and for each other. Elias, with his military training, fought with a fierce, unyielding precision. He was not a man running from his past, but a man fighting for his future. He was not a man alone, but a man who was a part of a family that would not be broken. O'ch'ú, with her quiet dignity, fought with a silent, powerful grace. She was a woman of peace, but she was also a warrior, a woman who would not let her people be defeated. She was a silent force of nature, a woman who would not be broken. She moved like a shadow, her body a part of the landscape, her spirit a part of the land itself. The fight was long and brutal, a grinding test of will and endurance. Many men fell and many were injured. But the Apache warriors, with their profound knowledge of the land and their unwavering resolve, were a force to be reckoned with. They were a people who would not be defeated. They were a people who would fight for their home, for their family, for their future. Finally, Silas, the ghost of vengeance, was defeated. He was a man who had been consumed by greed and hatred, a man who had been defeated not by brute force, but by a silent wisdom and a profound sense of unity. He was a man who had lost everything, a man who had been defeated not by a gun but by a people's will. Elias, with his face streaked with dirt and blood, looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment, her eyes filled with a profound sense of purpose. They had won. They had faced the ghost of vengeance, and they had won, not with brute force, but with a silent wisdom and a profound sense of unity. The final stand was a testament to a people's resilience, a testament to a man's newfound purpose. Elias had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she had given him a family, a cause to fight for, a future to believe in. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than any war cry. It was the silence of exhaustion, of profound loss and of a hard-won victory. The sun, once a cold observer, now bathed the valley in a gentle golden light, its warmth a promise of a new day, a promise that felt earned with blood and sacrifice. Elias, his body aching and his clothes torn, stood over the fallen, a silent sentinel in a world that had been turned upside down. The bounty hunters, the men who had come for blood and gold, were defeated. Their bodies lay scattered across the battlefield, a stark and brutal testament to the futility of their greed. Silas, the ghost of vengeance, lay motionless at the foot of the pass, his face a mask of defeat, his body a silent monument to the power of a people's will. The land, which had been a witness to their conflict, now seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Elias, with a deep sense of a heavy, somber peace, looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene strength, her eyes reflecting the dawn light. She was tending to the wounded, her movements quick and graceful, her hands a source of comfort and healing. She had not only fought for her people, she had saved them. She had defied a world that sought to break her, a world that sought to erase her people's history. And she had won. Her spirit, her strength, her quiet dignity had been the true force that had defeated the enemy, a force more powerful than any gun or any hatred. The elders, with their profound wisdom, approached Elias. They looked at him, their eyes filled with a deep sense of gratitude and a quiet respect. He was not a man of their tribe, but he was a man of their heart. He had fought for them, bled for them, and he had won. He had been a part of their story, a part of their victory, a part of their future. His journey, which had started with a simple act of human decency, had become a testament to the power of unity and the possibility of a different kind of world. One of the elders, the old man, with a face like a dried apple and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 years, walked towards Elias. He took Elias's hand, his touch firm and respectful, a hand clasp that bridged two worlds. "You are not a man of our blood," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound, "but you are a man of our spirit. You have honored us, you have honored the earth, and you have honored yourself." He then took a small leather pouch from his belt and gave it to Elias. Inside, there was a small polished stone, a stone that was smooth and black, with a simple design carved into it. It was a wampum, a symbol of a people's history, a symbol of their resilience. "This," the elder said, his voice a low melodic murmur, "is a promise of a future where two worlds can come together in peace and in unity. It is a gift of our gratitude. It is a gift of our heart." Elias was profoundly shaken. He had not expected this profound sense of acceptance, this gift that was more precious than any gold. He had been a man running from his past, a man who had thought his life was a closed book, and now he was a man who was holding a piece of a people's history in his hands, a man who was holding a promise of a new future. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment, her eyes filled with a profound sense of purpose. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return she had given him a new life, a new purpose, a new family. It had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. The weeks that followed the final stand were a time of profound healing and rebuilding. The village, which had been a place of tension and fear, now seemed to vibrate with a newfound sense of peace. The wounds of the battle, both physical and spiritual, began to mend, leaving behind not scars of pain, but marks of resilience. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, the low murmur of conversation, and the rhythmic beat of the healing drum, a testament to a people's unwavering spirit. Elias, who had arrived as a fugitive, now moved as a silent partner in the tribe's daily life, finding a deep sense of purpose in the quiet routines of the village. He learned to mend the woven fences with his bare hands, to tend to the crops with a newfound respect for the earth, and to live in harmony with a land that had once been alien to him. He was no longer a man running, but a man who had finally found his place. His bond with O'ch'ú deepened with every passing day, growing into something far beyond friendship. They were two souls from two different worlds, a cowboy and an Apache woman, but they were now family, bound by an act of unexpected kindness and a shared journey that had forged their spirits in the crucible of the desert. Their communication was a silent, graceful dance of gestures and expressions, a language that was felt in the heart, not spoken with the tongue. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, their hands moving in a quiet conversation that was more profound and more meaningful than any words. She taught him the names of the stars, the constellations that had guided her people for centuries, and he, in turn, taught her the names of the plants and the animals that he knew from his own world, finding a joy he had long forgotten in sharing his knowledge. One evening, as the fire crackled and cast long dancing shadows, O'ch'ú took out her wampum, the polished black stone she carried in her pouch. She held it in her hand, its cool surface a familiar comfort, her eyes closed in a silent prayer of gratitude and remembrance. She then slowly, deliberately, handed it to Elias, a silent gesture of trust that felt more significant than any spoken vow. It was a profound and beautiful act of a people's gratitude, an offering of their history and their future. "Take," she said, her voice a low, melodic sound that Elias now understood with his heart. "You are brother. You are family." Elias was profoundly shaken. He had been a man who had lost his own family to the brutal indifference of war, a man who had thought he would be a loner for the rest of his life. But now he was holding a piece of a people's history in his hands, a man who was holding a promise of a new future. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment, her eyes filled with a profound sense of purpose. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, an act born of simple human decency, and in return, she had given him a family. It was a gift he had not even known he was looking for, a gift that was more precious than any gold, a gift that had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn, written in the dust of the desert and sealed with a promise. The peace of the village was a beautiful thing, but it was a fragile thing. Like the delicate bloom of a desert flower, Elias knew his time there was limited. The world outside the mountains was still the same, a world of conflict and prejudice, a world that would not easily accept a man who had sided with the Apache. The bounty on his head was still active, a ghost of his past, a grim reminder that his presence was a constant danger. He knew that if he stayed, he would be putting the village at risk, a risk he was not willing to take. His past, a dark and persistent shadow, would eventually find its way into their tranquil sanctuary. One morning, as the sun began to rise, painting the mountains in a breathtaking palette of red and purple, Elias approached O'ch'ú. His face was a mask of grim determination, his eyes filled with a deep sense of sadness that ached in his soul. He had to go. He had to leave. He had to protect them from the storm that followed him. He knew she would understand, for she too was a guardian of her people, a woman with a promise to keep, a promise to the earth. O'ch'ú, with her quiet dignity, looked at him, her eyes filled with a dawning understanding. She knew what he was going to say, and she knew what he had to do. She had a promise to keep, a promise to her people, a promise to the land. She could not go with him. Her new life, her new purpose, her new home was in these mountains, a home she had fought to protect and reclaim. The path of the Thunder Woman lay with her people, with the wampum, with the sacred duty to pass on the knowledge and resilience of her ancestors. Elias, his voice thick with emotion, told her what he had to do. He had to leave. He had to go back to the outside world. He had to find a new path, a new purpose, a new future. He had to find a way to live in a world that would not accept him, a world that would not understand him, a world that was so different from the one he had found in the mountains. He spoke of the bounty, of the men who would never stop looking for him, of the inevitable conflict that would follow him wherever he went. He couldn't be a burden to the peace they had earned with their blood. O'ch'ú, with her quiet dignity and profound sense of love, looked at him, her eyes filled with a deep sense of loss. She took his hand, her touch gentle and respectful, and held it. With her hand, she made a gesture, a symbol of a circle with a zigzag line running through it, the symbol of the Thunder Woman. She then drew a line that separated them, a line that was a symbol of their two different paths. But then, with a confident hand, she drew a second line, a line that connected them, a line that was a symbol of their unbreakable bond, a symbol of their shared future, a symbol of a friendship that would last forever. It was a silent vow, a promise that their hearts, though separated by distance and culture, would always be connected by the journey they had shared. Elias was profoundly shaken. He had not expected this profound sense of love, this sense of a shared future. He had been a man running from his past, a man who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn, a story that was not his alone, but theirs. He looked at O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment, her eyes filled with a profound sense of purpose. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, an act born of simple decency, and in return she had given him a gift that was more precious than any gold, a gift that had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. The journey back to the outside world was a long and arduous one, each mile a physical and emotional test. Elias, with his new sense of purpose and his new understanding of the world, was no longer just a cowboy. He was a man who had been changed by an act of unexpected kindness, a man who had found a family, a cause to fight for, a future to believe in. He was a man who had been reborn in the heart of the mountains, his spirit cleansed by the sacred spring and fortified by the wisdom of a people who had survived against all odds. He rode Mercy, his loyal bay mare, with a newfound sense of confidence, his posture straight and his gaze steady. He was no longer a man running from his past, but a man walking towards a new future. The bounty on his head was still active, a ghost of his past, a reminder that the world he was returning to was a world of conflict and prejudice. But he was not afraid. He had a promise to keep, a promise to O'ch'ú, a promise to her people, a promise to the earth. He would find a way to live in a world that would not accept him, a world that would not understand him. He would find a way to live in a world that was so different from the one he had found in the mountains, but he would do it with the quiet dignity and profound resilience he had learned from a people who had taught him how to truly live. He arrived in a small, dusty town, a town that was a part of the world he had left behind. The streets were filled with the sounds of people, the low murmur of conversation, the clatter of a horse's hooves, all of it a jarring symphony after the profound quiet of the mountains. He found a job as a ranch hand, a simple job that required little conversation and much hard work. He was a man who was no longer looking for a fight, but a man who was looking for a purpose. He was a man who was no longer a loner, but a man who was a part of a family that was far away, but a family that was in his heart, a constant and comforting presence. One evening, as he sat by the fire, a man approached him, a man who had a familiar face, a face that he had seen before. It was the saloon owner, the man who had put a bounty on his head, the man who had started his journey. The man looked at Elias, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and frustration. He had not expected to see him again. He had not expected him to be alive. "Vance," the man sneered, his voice a low, gravelly sound. "I thought you were dead. I guess that bounty is still good, eh?" Elias, with his new sense of purpose, looked at the man, his eyes calm and steady. He was not a man who was looking for a fight, but a man who was ready for one, a man who had found a new kind of strength. "I am not the man you are looking for," Elias said, his voice a low melodic sound that held the quiet dignity of the mountains. "I am a man who has been changed by a kindness, a man who has found a new life, a new purpose, a new future." The saloon owner, surprised and defeated, looked at Elias. He saw not a man who was running from his past, but a man who was walking towards his future. He saw not a man who was a criminal, but a man who was a hero. He saw not a man who was a loner, but a man who was a part of a family. The man, humbled and defeated, walked away, a defeated figure in the vastness of the American West. Elias, with his face a picture of serene contentment, looked at the fire, its flames a warm, flickering beacon against the encroaching darkness. He had won. He had faced the ghost of vengeance, and he had won, not with brute force, but with a silent wisdom and a profound sense of unity. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return, she had given him a gift that was more precious than any gold, a gift that had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. Elias lived his new life with a quiet dignity, his days filled with the simple, satisfying rhythm of hard work. He had found a small ranch on the outskirts of a town called Redemption, a place that, by name alone, felt like a destination he was always meant to find. The land was tough, but honest, and it mirrored the man he had become. The past was no longer a shadow at his back, but a ghost he had finally laid to rest. The bounty on his head, a relic of a man he no longer recognized, still existed in dusty ledgers, but in the heart of the American West, where news traveled slow and stories were more important than facts, it had faded into a forgotten tale. The world had not accepted him, but he had accepted himself. He had found a new home, a new life, a new purpose, and it was a purpose not defined by what he had been, but by who he was. He carried the wampum, the polished black stone, in a small leather pouch around his neck. It was a tangible link to a world he had left behind, a constant reminder of the profound bond he shared with a people who had become his family. The wampum was a symbol of a people's history, a symbol of their resilience, a promise of a future where two worlds could come together in peace and unity. It was a gift of a people's gratitude, a gift of a people's heart. He was the keeper of the promise, a silent guardian of a truth that transcended the prejudice and conflict of his time. He would often hold the stone in his hand, feeling its smooth, cool surface, and remember the warmth of the council fire, the laughter of the children, and the profound wisdom of the elders. It was a connection that was not broken by distance, but strengthened by a shared understanding. He often thought of O'ch'ú, her face a picture of serene contentment, her eyes filled with a profound sense of purpose. He wondered what she was doing, what her life was like in the mountains. He wondered if she thought of him, if she remembered the cowboy who had saved her, the cowboy who had found a new life in the heart of the mountains. He knew that she was the keeper of the promise, a woman who had been changed by an act of unexpected kindness, a woman who had found a new life, a new purpose, a new future. He knew that their journey, their story, was a part of something bigger, a story that was not just their own, but a story of two worlds, two cultures, coming together in a moment of shared humanity. One evening, as he sat by the fire, the crackling flames a warm, flickering beacon against the encroaching darkness, a man approached him. He was a man with a familiar face, a face that Elias had seen before, but not in this place. It was Tina, the young warrior from the Apache tribe, his face etched with a mix of gratitude and a quiet respect. He looked at Elias, his eyes filled with a deep sense of connection, and he spoke in a low, melodic sound that Elias now understood. "Brother," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "she sends a message. The sun has risen. The day has come." Elias was profoundly shaken. He had not expected this profound sense of connection, this sense of a shared future. He had been a man running from his past, a man who had thought his life was a closed book, and now he was a man who was a part of a story that was just beginning, a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. The message from O'ch'ú was not just a message of a new day, but a message of a new era, a promise of a future they would face together, a future they would fight for. It was a promise that the unity they had found in the mountains was not just a fleeting moment, but a lasting legacy. He had freed the enormous Apache woman from her chains, and in return she had given him a gift that was more precious than any gold, a gift that had left him profoundly shaken, a cowboy who had thought his life was a closed book, only to find that it was a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn. Elias lived a long and peaceful life, his days filled with the simple, satisfying rhythm of hard work. He was a man who had been changed by an act of kindness, a man who had found a new life, a new purpose, a new family. He was a man who was no longer a loner, but a man who was a part of a family that was far away, but a family that was in his heart. The bounty on his head faded into obscurity, a forgotten relic of a time when he had been a man running from his past, not a man who had found a future. The world had not accepted him, but he had accepted himself. And in doing so, he had found a peace that transcended the prejudice and conflict of his time. He often spoke of his journey, not with bitterness or regret, but with a profound sense of gratitude. He would sit by the fire in the evenings, his face a canvas of lines etched with the wisdom of the ages, and he would tell his story. He spoke of the woman he had saved, the woman who had saved him, the woman who had given him a new life, a new purpose, a new future. He spoke of O'ch'ú, a woman who was a force of nature, a woman who had defied a world that sought to break her. He spoke of her quiet dignity, her profound wisdom, her unwavering spirit. He spoke of her as a sister, a guide, a silent partner in a journey that had changed him forever. He spoke of the mountains that had been a place of refuge, a place of peace, a place of family. He spoke of the sacred spring, the giver of life, a place of profound purity and a symbol of a people's resilience. He spoke of the council of elders, their faces etched with the wisdom of the ages, their eyes filled with a deep sense of gratitude and a quiet respect. He spoke of the fire of unity, the fire that had burned bright in the heart of the village, a symbol of a people's resilience, a symbol of a man's newfound purpose. He spoke of the bounty hunters, the men who had been defeated not by a gun, but by a people's will. He spoke of the ghost of vengeance, the man who had been defeated not by brute force, but by a silent wisdom and a profound sense of unity. He spoke of the wampum, the polished black stone, a symbol of a people's history, a symbol of their resilience. He spoke of the promise of a future where two worlds could come together in peace and in unity. He spoke of the day the sun had risen, the day the promise had been kept, the day the new dawn had come. He was a man who had been a cowboy, a man who had been a soldier, a man who had been a man on the run. But now he was a man who was a living testament to the power of a single act of kindness, the power of a single act of courage, the power of a single act of hope. He was a man who had been changed by an act of unexpected kindness, a man who had found a new life, a new purpose, a new family. His story, the story of the cowboy who had freed the enormous Apache woman, became a legend. It was a story that was told around campfires, a story that was told in saloons, a story that was told in the quiet corners of the American West. It was a story that was a reminder that even in a world of conflict and prejudice, a single act of kindness could change a life, could change a world, could change a future. Elias, with his face etched with the wisdom of the ages, with his heart filled with a profound sense of peace, knew that his journey was a legacy of mercy, a legacy of hope, a legacy of a promise that had been kept. The final chapter of Elias Vance's story was not written in words, but in a profound sense of peace that radiated from the man himself. He lived a long and peaceful life, his days filled with the simple, satisfying rhythm of hard work. He was a man who had been a cowboy, a man who had been a soldier, a man who had been a man on the run. But now he was a man who was a living testament to the power of a single act of kindness, the power of a single act of courage, the power of a single act of hope. His life was not a story of what he had lost, but a story of what he had found, a new purpose, a new family, a new home. The bounty on his head was a forgotten relic, a ghost of a past that no longer held power over him. The world had not accepted him, but he had accepted himself, and in doing so, he had found a peace that transcended the prejudice and conflict of his time. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, a man who had found his purpose, a man who had found his family, a man who had found his home. He was buried on a hill overlooking the vast expanse of the American West, a place where the mountains met the plains, a place where two worlds could come together in peace and in unity. His grave was marked by a simple wooden cross, a symbol of his faith, and beside it a small polished black stone, a wampum, a symbol of his promise. He was a man who had been a part of two worlds, a man who had found peace in both. The sun, a golden orb in the sky, rose over the mountains, painting the world in a breathtaking palette of red and purple. The day had come. The promise had been kept. The story had come to a close. But the legacy of a cowboy who had freed an enormous Apache woman from her chains would live on. A legend that was a reminder that even in a world of conflict and prejudice, a single act of kindness could change a life, could change a world, could change a future. The wind, a silent force of nature, whispered a name that was a part of the land itself. O'ch'ú. It was a name that was a part of the mountains, a name that was a part of the sacred spring, a name that was a part of a people's history. And it whispered another name, a name that was a part of a new world, a name that was a part of a promise that had been kept. Elias. The two names were a part of a story that was not just their story, but a story of a new beginning, a story of a new dawn, a story of a promise that had been kept. The sun had risen. The day had come. The story had come to a close. But the legacy of a cowboy who had freed an enormous Apache woman from her chains would live on forever. A legend that was a reminder that even in a world of conflict and prejudice, a single act of kindness could change a life, could change a world, could change a future. The final chapter of Elias Vance's life was a testament to the fact that the greatest treasures are not found in gold, but in the human heart, and that the most profound victories are not won with a gun, but with a promise.